Hello and welcome everyone to Reuters Climate Frontlines. We're live from Times Square today and tomorrow to bring you as many voices and as much insight as we can from proceedings here at Climate Week NYC. This is the event's biggest year yet since it started 16 years ago, a fact that might surprise many given the political headwinds from Washington and renewed skepticism from many quarters around climate reporting and hitting those climate goals. Organisers apparently even wondered, will people show up? Well, show up they have. We're told of record numbers of companies participating and more events than ever to attend. The rallying theme, as you can see on the walls there in those shots, is power on, a call for urgency, innovation and global collaboration at a time when many government pledges are in question and the gap between companies' net zero pledges and actual spending to get there remains a real concern. So lots and lots for us to get our teeth into both today and tomorrow. Let me just tell you what's coming up on today's show. This show today is going to have a special focus on the corporate carbon dilemma for big business. Sustainability heads from PepsiCo, MasterCard and Standard Chartered will join shortly. But we start this morning with policy and a conversation that brings together voices from opposite ends of the political spectrum, each with deep experience in shaping energy and climate policy. Let me introduce them now. Sarah Ladislaw is Managing Director of the US program at RMI, former senior climate and energy official in the Biden White House. Great to have you on, Sarah. Great to see you. Drew Bond is sat next to Sarah. He is CEO of C3 Solutions, the conservative climate advocacy group, previously a senior advisor in the George W. Bush administration. Drew, great to see you too. Look, we've got plenty of time to have a nice, relaxed chit-chat here. How far apart are you guys really on climate? Is there a misconception about the distance apart? Because you clearly speak different language, but you clearly have the same goals.
Go ahead, please.
You go, Sarah.
I actually don't think we're that far apart. We may have been further apart a few years ago when there was, and Drew and I, we've had these conversations for years, so it's convenient that we know a lot about what each other's think. But we could have been further apart a number of years ago. I think the fundamental thing that has changed is the real economy and the role of the type of solutions that we need to see to be able to bring down greenhouse gas emissions have actually become some of the mainstream solutions that all industry and players need to be able to do the things that they want to do anyway. And I think that has really been able to bring not just, sort of liberals and conservatives together, but just more business communities together, coalitions together to really think about how to advance the type of things that they want to be doing anyway in their business.
What do you think, Drew? I mean, what would you disagree on with Sarah fundamentally here about this? In fact, when we spoke on the phone last week, Drew, you said, and I quote this administration could be the best thing to happen to climate, you said.
Yes.
You really believe that?
I do.
Why is that?
Not because they have decided to take climate on as their headline banner. In fact, as you know, President Trump has been very critical of climate and the climate agenda. I think the reality is that ultimately what we need is more energy that's more abundant, more affordable, and as clean as possible. And that has to be within the realm of what is actually practical. And so what's holding the U.S. economy back from being even cleaner, and it is already the cleanest in the world, but what's holding us back is not actually more spending on innovation, although we support spending on innovation. It's actually permitting. It's the legal framework, the regulatory structure that is holding back our ability to build more small modular nuclear reactors, geothermal, hydro, solar, you name it.
I mean, which is critical. Of course, those conversations need to happen. Where, Sarah, do you think are the opportunities with this Congress and this administration to move the process forward? Is it realistic to think we can have those constructive conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what we saw was in the first part of this administration, there was business to be done on the One Big Beautiful Bill, right? And a lot of that is quite remarkable that we kept a huge number of clean energy-oriented incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act in the context of that bill. And that was not necessarily the given sort of starting point for where we thought we might end up. And so it really does show that a lot of the investment that's gone into clean energy, all the way from solar and wind and batteries to things like clean hydrogen and CCUS and a whole bunch of other technologies, nuclear power, all of these things have some bipartisan support, and that bipartisan support showed up and was present in the outcome of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now, I think Drew is absolutely correct. Sorry, we don't disagree. But that permitting reform is the next thing to get done. Yeah. Both permitting reform and really taking a hard look at the electric power sector. Yeah. We are, and I think the administration is right in this front, like we are in a position where we have an electricity crisis on our hands. Like we are going to stress the electric power grid in some pretty fundamental ways over the next few years. And it's very part and parcel of our national security that we make sure we address those issues. The Hill is trying to figure out what to do about that. It's very complex, obviously. It's both governed by the federal and state and local. But they're really trying hard, and it is a bipartisan agenda. It'll take some time, but I think that that's the possibility.
That sounds pretty optimistic to me. Are you as optimistic in terms of the time frame of getting this done? I mean, and getting projects done. I mean, it takes a long time. What, 7, 8, 10 years? This needs to happen more quickly.
It needs to happen way more quickly. I mean, the average time frame to deploy almost any technology, pick your favorite, is about 7 years. Yeah. You know, I say 7 to 10 to none at never. So, you know, I mean, to give you, that's sort of the broader scale, but I mean, to give you a specific example, like on the micro scale, I've talked to a small rural electric cooperative, right? They serve rural customers in Colorado. They literally want to replace an old line with a new line, not rebuilding anything. And they've had an application sitting at the BLM since late 2023 for approval. Like, that ought to be just an absolute yes. Notify the agency, we're going to do it, and we do it. That ought to take a month, not never. Yeah. And when we're talking about small modular nuclear reactors or, all of the technologies, frankly, in the United States are the cleanest, safest forms of technology, period. And we know the environmental possibilities and the externalities. We know what can and can't go wrong. We've got a lot of experience building and operating power plants. So it shouldn't have to be, let's apply and wait 7 years and litigate and all of that.
I want to talk a little bit about what's going on here. I mentioned right at the top there, record participation, lots of events. There is an energy here. There is an optimism. There are valid reasons to be optimistic. But at the same time, an hour from now, the president's going to speak at the UN. I wonder, let me ask you this straight up, actually, Sarah, with that old hat on of yours. Could the US go so far as to withdraw from the UNFCCC, and what would that mean for the treaty?
I mean, it certainly could. It's an option that's been on the table. It is a logistically, complicated thing to do. I think the question is, what would the impact be for the UNFCCC and the rest of the world? And I think what we're seeing is, while people would probably find that problematic from the U.S. perspective, the U.S. has always played a big and important leadership role in those conversations. It is a robust ecosystem of countries and companies around the world that are organized not just around the thing that I spend my time working on, which is the energy sector, but on agriculture and nature and all of the things that go along with this climate agenda. All of that stuff is going really, it's a very robust ecosystem of people with actions and activities. And so I do think it would be problematic, both fundamentally for the United States, right? We should not take ourselves out of tables where we want to have a conversation. That's not really what we need to do. It's not what the Trump administration did the first time around. So I think that could be a mistake for the United States. I think the rest of the world would probably be able to make do with conversations.
Okay. I guess at the same time, Drew, the US would, I imagine, would want to kind of keep a foot in so that it has some say over proceedings, whether we're talking about tariffs, pressure on targets, the fossil fuel piece. I imagine they want to keep a foot in.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Sarah said, I think we want to be at the table. I think it's important for us, even if we disagree with the overall agenda. And, look, the United States we've reduced our emissions 20% in 20 years. And that has been as a result of either being in or out of the Paris Agreement. Frankly, I think the Paris Agreement is sort of null and void in relation to the actual impact. The reality is that we've reduced our emissions mainly because of natural gas and also innovations in things like solar and wind and hydro. So that's where I think that most of the agreement, frankly, that we find ourselves focused on is how do we just move technology faster, move it farther faster. And it's important to be at the table. I mean, I think, look, we were talking earlier, we've been at a couple of COP, meetings. I think in my mind, the jury's out as to how effective those are, but I think they're definitely important for building relationships internationally. And those international relationships are key not only for climate, but also for our geopolitical position.
Yeah, I want to finish up with a couple of questions related to U.S. companies and how they operate in a context like this. The first question is, you have China and Brazil stepping up as the U.S. pulls back. I mean, I know there's disappointment over the EU targets as well. We're going to speak with Teresa Ribera a little bit later on in the show. How U.S. companies should position in that context. They need to be thinking a little bit more out, I would imagine.
Out meaning in relation to those other countries?
Correct, yeah.
I mean, I think, listen, what is the good news and the bad news story on climate is that clean energy technologies and the future direction of the energy system is now central to how countries think about the future of their economy. And China has done an amazing job producing a lot of clean energy technology and dropping the cost of those things. But what you see from Brazil to the United States to the Europeans to all other countries in the world is that they want to have a share in actually producing those technologies and selling them to the world as well. And so now there's like a geopolitical angle, not just about the COP negotiations, but actually about the positions that countries are taking in this massive transformation of the global economy. Yeah. And it'll be the single largest capital formation in the history of the world, right? So they should. I think this is how companies are starting to think in the midst of this, in the midst of tariffs, in the midst of control over local resourcing for the technologies you bring into your country. They need to be able to adjust in a very dynamic world.
A similar final question to you, Drew. One piece of advice for the CEO of a Fortune 500 company trying to navigate climate strategy in this context, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have to focus on capital formation and supply chains and supply chain security. As we look geopolitically, I mean, China has got a lockhold on many of our early minerals and mining and processing all the way through to the manufacturing. So that's where I think we've got to be very smart about where we invest, who we invest with. We need to find more allies and strengthen our allies because, I mean, frankly, China, I mean, this is not news. China has been at this game for year after year after year, and their 5-year strategic plans for the last 20 years saying, we're going to own these supply chains. We're going to command the world's respect. Yeah. And so we've got to fight back on that. We fight back through economic reasons and ways by investing.
Drew, Sarah, thank you so much for kicking off our show this morning. It's really been a fascinating discussion. Thanks very much to both of you. Now, one of the big questions 10 years on from the Paris Agreement, which of course set the 1.5-degree target for countries, is who's now driving the climate change agenda? We touched on it a little bit in that discussion. A decade ago, it seemed very much to be the policymakers. But where is climate leadership coming from now? Just before Climate Week started, I caught up with Christiana Figueres, one of the architects, of course, of Paris, and asked her who she thinks is now driving this process forward.
It's a very interesting question because we are seeing an inversion of where we were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, there's no doubt the governments were pulling forward and defining what the direction was and being supported and pushed by the real economy. The technologies of solution, all of the clean tech technologies have now advanced so much that the real economy, the market forces are now in the position of being the pull force toward decarbonization. Governments, of course, continue. They have a role to play, but they're no longer pulling forward. They're now supporting and pushing. So a complete inversion of the push and pull forces.
More of Christiana throughout this morning's show, but let's get the corporate take on this now. Joining me, 3 chief sustainability officers at 3 very different companies. Ellen Czakowski is the CSO at MasterCard, leading efforts to embed ESG into the company's global strategy. Next to her, actually not next to her, at the end is Marissa Drew, CSO at Standard Chartered, a veteran of global finance, now steering sustainability across emerging markets. We've spoken plenty in the past, Marissa, last, of course, in London during Climate Week. And Jim Andrew is in the middle, CSO, PepsiCo, architect of the company's Pep Plus transformation. Really good to see all of you. Look, I don't know how much of that Christiana soundbite you caught. She was talking about the push and the pull, who's driving the process, the policymakers or market forces, and clearly she thinks, as I'm sure you do too, it's the market forces. Now, Marissa, let me start with that. How are those forces driving or dictating, if you like, what the corporates are doing now in this space?
Well, I look at everything through a finance lens, and the key here in many cases is the mobilization of capital, and it has to be the private sector that's stepping in to fill the void. I think Christiana referenced the fact that government coffers are pretty thin these days. And the private sector has very big, high ambition, and I think it starts with being very deliberate, setting a goal for yourself, trying to achieve an outcome, and then drafting your company in behind.
I mean, to be fair, there is. And again, we've talked about this. There is a little bit of cynicism and skepticism creeping in around that finance piece, given what happened with GFANS, given what happened with some of these other alliances.
So, Axel, let me tell you, though, rest of world, right? We tend to often look at things through, the lens of where we're sitting, and we're sitting here in New York, and things feel a little bit fraught. But having just spent the whole week, 2 weeks ago, in Hong Kong, at Hong Kong Green Week, I can tell you that China, all of Southeast Asia, Middle East, India, the scaling and the flow of capital and the billions and billions and billions of investment, it's happening. Okay. And we're reaching all new highs, in terms of sustainable finance.
That sort of impetus that Marissa's talking about, Ellen, how much of that are you seeing here in the US?
Well, so the MasterCard Economics Institute just came out with a study recently that was measuring the transactions that we see for online luxury apparel purchases. 27% of the online luxury apparel market is secondhand, is circular, right? Shocking, right, that it's so big. When I first got the draft of the report, I was like, I think the number's too high. Go back and double check, and they did, and it's true. And for mass purchases, it's 5%, also higher than I would have thought. So we're seeing market shifts. We're seeing consumers engage. They want more sustainable choices, and it's a great time to be investing in circularity.
And I get your business has this really unique perspective into millions and millions and millions of consumer habits. What are you learning? And that's, I guess, the Scope 3 bit as well in all of this. But what are you learning from that?
Well, I think, again, what is the opportunity and how are we driving incentives to inspire, inform, and enable more sustainable choices? So we've started investing in some pilots around deposit return schemes, particularly in Europe, where kind of the culture is really set around some of these regulations and these concepts. And we're seeing tremendous results. I was just in Aarhus, Denmark, where we have a reusable cup program going on in the center city. And there are 55 merchants that are participating in that program. And they've saved a lot of money. They've reduced the waste of these single-use cups. And the deposit return scheme's working well.
All right. Jim, it's well known that PepsiCo revised its strategy. I mean, so you call it evolving your strategy. Others might call it backtracking. I mean, we heard all of the verbs thrown in there. What is the overall strategy now, and how has it changed as a result of the context here in the US?
Well, it's not just context in the U.S., it's context around the world. But what we've always done with PepsiCo Positive is link it to our business. So each of the goals that we have is fundamentally linked to how do we create a more resilient, sustainable business. So think about just one example, agriculture. I mean, PepsiCo is the second largest food and beverage company in the world. We have 300,000 farmers in our direct and indirect supply chains because we're about 60% food. So if farmers can't grow food, and the food system is at risk in the world, we don't have a business. And so we have increased our regenerative agriculture targets from 7 million to 10 million. We've added, Marissa and I were just talking, we've added a nature component to them. Why? Because it's good for business, it's important. So what we've tried to do is link things to the business. Therefore, the context around some of the noise, some of the change, doesn't matter as much because it's about how do we align what we're trying to do to build a sustainable business and keep it functioning, and in our case, keep food on the table of the world.
None of you, and apologies for putting it like this, but none of you is saying that things are harder as a result of the current context. It's really hard for me to try and squeeze that sort of statement out of anyone here in New York, or indeed any big US company. Are things harder?
Well, maybe I'll go first. What we're trying to do is change systems, and that's something I've talked a lot about already, is how do we create system change? Because each of the three of us as companies are doing a lot of things. The question is, how do we change, again, the agricultural system? And that requires farmers at the center, it requires governments, it requires NGOs, it requires corporates, it requires all society. That has, I think, gotten harder because it's not moving fast enough. We have to actually change the second derivative. We have to accelerate the speed at which we're moving, and that's more challenging because there's not enough people in the system moving against it.
Marissa, again, something we've talked about is, well, the investability of nature, and Jim mentioned nature, but how are you guys, how are the financiers here, how are the banks working together with the PepsiCos and the MasterCards to help them through this process, whether it's the carbon credit space?
Absolutely. So it starts with being mission aligned, so we pick our topics where we do have alignment, and then we figure out ways to collaborate. But we are using the carbon markets as one mechanism to help invest in nature. Maybe I can just give you an example. We've just recently announced, as we all eyes are on Brazil as we move into COP at the end of the year, we just announced an agreement, a jurisdictional carbon credit mandate to sell 5 million credits. So we're mandated as a firm to sell this for the state of Acre. It's the first jurisdictional mandate of size. This is serious scale, 5 million credits. That capital, when those credits are sold, that capital will flow to protect against deforestation and flow money back into indigenous populations who are the stewards of the earth. So that's an example of a market.
And with a layperson's hat on, trying to unravel what that really means, is the fact that Standard Chartered are involved in that project, I guess that allays the concerns of the PepsiCos and the MasterCards when they want to invest in these sorts of things. Is that right?
Yeah, so to a degree, again, mission alignment, but I'm sure if I'm sitting in Jim's shoes, what does he want to do if he's going to purchase carbon credits or for his last mile abatement? He wants to ensure that there's high integrity in those credits, that they do what they say they're going to do. We can be a force for good in that respect as we are helping to set the standards for what high integrity means. And then the combination of us putting our name against it, you know, and partnering up with high quality corporates as partners.
In fact, I mean, we've got Annette Nazareth from the council coming on tomorrow, actually, onto the show tomorrow. Shame she's not around today to talk about this now, because, of course, that integrity piece is so critical for companies like yours. Where are we now on integrity in the carbon markets? The fact that Standard Chartered and other banks are getting involved and, again, as I said, helping allay your concerns helps, but do you feel confident in those markets?
Look, I think the markets continue to evolve. They continue to get stronger, better, higher integrity. We have our Priceless Planet Coalition program, which is a commitment to restore 100 million trees. And we're in the process of transitioning it to a carbon credit program with Conservation International. So lots of work there. But, you know, bigger in terms of the decarbonization picture of what we're all working to do. Some exciting news out of MasterCard this summer when we reported that we grew the company by 12% net revenue and we reduced our emissions by 7%. So carbon credits are good, but how are we actually decarbonizing the actual emissions? And we're making a lot of progress there.
Jim, are your investors really getting this now? Are the institutional investors in the company and others, are they really getting this investability slash sustainability message now, would you say?
I think you have a really big range of investors. We have some that we meet with every quarter, and they ask very sophisticated questions. But there's a lot who I think are most interested in the financial performance of the company, what's happening in this quarter, what's happening. And they're less interested in some of the sustainability issues. We invest in the things we do because, again, they're tied to the health of the business. They're tied to the strength of the business. Either we have customers asking for them, we need them for our license to operate, right? Things we need farmers to keep farming. Those are things that are important for the health of the business. I would say not every investor fully appreciates that. And again, you've got a range. We're hopeful over time that will change, but I think it's still very much a work in progress.
And Marissa, I want to come back to the finance piece. We've spoken to Bill a lot, Bill Winters, the CEO at Standard Chartered, a lot about this and the work that you do and the projects you have in developing markets.
Yes.
How's all that going? And are investors here and in Dubai and in Sharm and in Glasgow, are they understanding the urgency and the need properly now of this?
So, again, I think Jim said, you have a broad swath, but back to the investor question, when we look at our investor base, our shareholders in Standard Chartered Bank, which is a proxy for do they understand it and do they care and are they supportive. We've had a wonderful stock reset. I can't claim it's all because of sustainability, but one of our hallmarks was we reached $982 million of sustainable finance income. This isn't, this is income that we produced last year. It was a year ahead of a target that we had to do $1 billion by the end of this year. And the returns on that sustainable finance are higher than the average of our overall bank.
Yeah.
So what we're communicating to our investors is, as Jim says, really good business, but by the way, we're delivering great outcomes. So then when you go to our markets and you touch it and you feel it on the ground, you can see the impact that we're making, that connection with our communities, our regulators, the stakeholders. It's tangible. It's absolutely something that they understand.
Really, really cheeky question to finish up, and it's got to be really brief, the answer from each of you, if possible. And this is about New York Climate Week. Do you feel you have to be here this week? Do you feel you have to be seen here, or are you going to leave with something achieved?
Yeah, I think I want to be here, right? Everybody's here. The conversation is here.
But you want to be here because you want to achieve something.
I want to achieve something. I'm looking for new partnerships. We're looking to enable more circularity. So, I mean, Jim and I were just talking about reusable cups and this deposit return scheme and how can we partner. Jim's got some great pilots already happening in some stadiums around the U.S. and we'd like to be a part of that.
Okay.
So this is why we're here.
Okay. Same question to you. I imagine we're going to get the same answer as well.
I want to be here. We want to be here because it's about doing, and this is a target-rich environment. Everybody's here. Within 10 blocks in any direction, you can meet with anybody you need to. The three of us have already had business conversations standing out in the hallway. That doesn't happen when we're spread around the globe. Critically important, great opportunity. You got to make it happen. It's a 24-hour full contact sport, but if you make it happen, it's a great opportunity.
And like the carbon deal with Accra in Brazil, any big deals you could quickly tell us about before you leave?
How about big themes? I can never talk about big deals until they happen. But big themes, I leave here. We have a very, very serious talk about doers roundtable on methane. So we've been talking about carbon emissions forever, but methane as a toxic substance has to be addressed. And the people who are going to be in the room at this roundtable range from big oil all the way through to, what I would call the sort of midstream players, all figuring out how do we set some standards and sign on to partnerships and pledges. And on the financing side, we can actually say that this is good business to capture all of that that's going in the atmosphere. And actually, by doing that, you save the companies money. So that's just one example. Another big topic is adaptation finance. We got to get this on the stage as the effects of climate change are hitting. We need private capital to flow, and we're crowding in so many people on that topic too. So these are the sorts of things that we're rolling up our sleeves getting into.
Well, look, I wish you the best of luck. We'll be watching, and hopefully see you all in Brazil as well. All right. To Ellen, to Jim and Marissa, thank you very much indeed for coming in. Hope you have a fruitful week this week. Right, plenty to come. She's covered climate change from the streets of New Delhi to the shores of the Caribbean. Katy Daigle is Reuters climate editor. She cuts through greenwashing, decodes policy, spotlights the stories that matter most. Also coming up, the most influential European voice on climate change, and two climate leaders optimistic about what's to come despite the headwinds. All of that is coming up.
At a time when truth and new ideas have never been more important, Reuters Next examines the big issues without fear or favor to get a clearer picture about what lies ahead.
Reuters Next Gulf will provide a forum to ignite real change and to build a better tomorrow for generations to come.
Join us at Reuters Next, because in a time of great change, the most important question is, what's next?
Welcome back, everyone. Katy Daigle is our environment and our climate editor and joins me for Katy's Corner. You've got your own patch here, Katy, which is very exciting. Let me start by asking you whether there's been any big news for you out of this event so far. I mean, I know it's only been going a couple of days, but what's excited you most?
What's interesting this year so far is the messaging is very positive. I mean, the guests you've had today have been talking about the energy transition underway, including decarbonization. And this messaging right now toward reassuring the world that we are still on mission, it's coming at a good time for the world. People are scared. Warming is speeding up. We are, of course, waiting for news tomorrow, which is when the governments will be announcing their new climate pledges.
And it looks like, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Yes, that's of course because that's the day at the General Assembly that's the climate piece sits in that. It looks like we're going to be a little bit disappointed. We've got Teresa Ribera coming up on the show. Murmurings are that it's going to be anemic. What are you hearing?
Similar. It's very much a wait and see, but this is the tough part of the energy transition. It's messy. A lot of governments are struggling to reach agreement within, amongst themselves about what to do. Energy security is a big concern. And this is sort of the inflection point we're in, the energy transition, right? It can be true that we're going gangbusters with renewables at the same time that we're squeamish about getting rid of fossil fuels. Both can be true at the same time.
You and I have talked about this before. Climate, when things were really bad on the multilateral sort of stage, the sort of the global collaboration and discussion, climate used to be a bit of a bright spot, didn't it? It doesn't look like it's that bright spot anymore. It seems to me that Europe is going its way, China's going its way, the BRICS are going their way, the US is clearly going its way. Is multilateralism dead in this space as well?
It's hard to say. When the UNFCCC was signed, it was, fun fact, the first treaty that was signed by nearly all governments in the world. That was a showcase in multilateralism. And since then, the treaty has helped governments achieve quite a lot of progress in terms of moving money toward climate projects, getting the decarbonization agenda on the table, moving renewable energy. But it's tricky. And now we're seeing, as Teresa had said and Christiana, that the driving force is not so much the governments and policy, it's the real economy. Yeah. It's the companies that are facing, they're facing a need to change.
When you hear PepsiCo and MasterCard and Standard Chartered and other corporates, speak to us and in an incredibly bullish way about what's going on. What do you feel about that? Is there? Yeah, I ask this delicately, but how much greenwashing is still going on, and where is that seen most by a reporter and your team?
It's not so much greenwashing. I mean, when we talk about the word greenwashing, there seems to be a sort of sinister thought behind it. It's, sometimes there might be some omission, right, which you can say is good or bad. Obviously, companies are going to be showcasing their good works more than the things they're struggling with. There's a lot more that companies could be doing, as well as governments, as well as each of us individually. But what is clear is that companies are very concerned about their viability in the future. And that's not going away. No.
Do you feel, just to finish up with, do you feel as a journalist, one of your responsibilities is to hold the corporates and the financial institutions accountable for their climate claims? Is that a big part of what you do, and how good are we at that?
It's really tough. The news is moving very fast. And so just by virtue of trying to, we can't cover everything all at once. That said, we live for, us journalists live for holding, holding truth to account, making sure that people, citizens, have the information they need to make rational decisions about their society and their future. Where we start to run into trouble is when we're looked at for offering the prescription, right? Is it our role to advise people on what they should do with their investment? Is it our role to say this is a good policy or a bad? And that's where there's a sort of a range of feelings. There's a lot more activism in some areas of journalism. Other areas want to play it, straight down the line. Reuters is very, very much straight down the line. We want to hold a mirror up to the world and really help everyone kind of see what's coming.
Well, look, Katy, it's been great. I'm really excited. I know you've got to rush off and you've got lots to do, but I'm really excited. You're going to come back onto the show, maybe later today, hopefully tomorrow. I want to find out who you've been talking to, what we should be watching. But Katy, thank you very much indeed. Right, coming up in just a moment, one of Europe's most influential voices on climate and energy, From the Green Deal to energy security, what is next for Europe's climate ambitions? And can Europe and other countries stand by their bold emissions-cutting promises in time for COP30 in Brazil? First, though, back quickly to Christiana Figueras. We've talked a lot about her already today. I asked her how important big proclamations will be at this COP.
We are now to the point where we don't necessarily need big international agreements coming out of the COPs. This is a COP where you will not see one big result negotiated among national governments. We're now moving from that, which we are used to an implementation phase that is going to be very evident at COP30, which is no longer one big result, but rather a multiplicity of solution spaces, coalitions, efforts of many different stakeholders working together that are proof points of the fact that we are moving forward in the decarbonization of the global economy. A very different dynamic for COPs, this COP and further COPs.
To talk about that and to talk about plenty more is Teresa Ribera, Executive Vice President of the European Commission for a clean, just and competitive transition, and of course a driving force behind the European Green Deal. Very nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming on to our show here at Reuters. Look, I want to start, I'll come on to what Christiana was saying there about COP in just a moment, but let me just come on to Europe and Europe's targets. There is clearly disappointment with the latest statement of intent, I think it was called, out of Europe on the NDCs. Some have said it's a missed opportunity because so many countries look to Europe when setting their own NDCs. Teresa, how united is Europe on its climate goals right now?
Oh, I think that it is united because this message is that we intend to fulfill our commitments and our pathways. And the discussion is how to combine the competitiveness measures so to come up with a consistent pathway to the full decarbonization that is targeted by 2050. And I think that, yes, sometimes that we knew already, maybe different views on how to address the different policies, the different measures, but the message is pretty clear. We are there. There are still lots of things to do. But the commitments and the expectations towards Belém remain untouchable.
So you don't sense any rowing back on commitment among members in Europe?
Well, I sense that there are some political families stating, as it is the case here in the United States, that climate can wait for us.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that this is such a big mistake. But not only for climate reasons, of course, it is a big mistake.
Yeah.
Not only for social reasons, of course, it impacts people. For economic reasons, it's just madness. It's committing suicide.
But you just put Europe in the same sort of breath as the US in this space. You know, a few years ago, we were proudly holding up Europe and China and the BRICS as the trendsetters and the pace setters. Do you not feel like that anymore?
Yes, I think that we can feel this way, of course. We have done things that allow us to say that we are very well positioned to overdo in our targets by 2030. We are combining things that will come up so to ensure that we will get as much as possible by 2035, knowing that we are in the middle of this energy transition, that much needs to be done still in Europe, but that the identification of industrial success with the deep decarbonization coming up with the companies is already there. And I think that it is normal that once the low-hanging fruit are already there, we enter into a new phase where we need to assess because it is a little bit more difficult, it is a little bit more demanding, but yes, we are committed to keep on doing.
I asked Sarah Ladislaw earlier, who's now RMI, worked for Joe Biden, whether she thought there was a chance the US might pull out of the UNFCCC treaty. Do you think there is a chance that they will? And what would that mean for the treaty? How damaging would it be for the treaty?
I think it could be terrible news for the humankind. I think that we need to work together. I think that this is a product of the joint efforts being developed by the whole international community, including the United States. I think that the Paris Agreement responds to these expectations of how we can build on our own premises the best way to achieve the goals. And I think that that could mean that the United States accepts being isolated when compared to the relations to the rest of the world.
Given what we've seen so far with Paris, is this likely to happen?
It is quite shocking to see that a country that has been respected, the House of Freedoms, Liberties, Rights, Improvements, Cooperation, technology breakthroughs, decides a kind of suicide. So to be isolated, to forget about the rest of the world, and of course this means leaving the space for the others. And of course there are others that could be delighted to fill in this space. So it is quite shocking, but my main message in this concrete point is that we hear with great expectation and hope all those saying that America is all in, and that mayors, business communities, governors know that they need to bet in the future instead of burning fossil fuels.
And I'm glad you raised that, actually, because tomorrow's show, we've got a bunch of mayors coming on. We have the AG of California coming on. So we are going to talk about that influence at the subnational level, which is clearly critical. Let me ask you, Teresa, China is clearly a massively important player in this space. Brazil, who are you talking to here in New York over the next couple of days? Tomorrow is a big day, of course, for climate. Have you got any bilaterals set up? I'm not certain that you're going to tell me, but who is Europe meeting with here to try and move this process forward?
I have got several meetings, and I will still have different meetings, but let me come back to China, because you mentioned China. I was to China to beginning of July, and we came up with a very relevant statement being signed by the leaders of the European Union and China, saying loud and clear that we commit to keep on doing as much as possible according the Paris Agreement rules, because we understand that climate action is critical not only for multilateralism but also for our own societies and our own economies. China is changing the way they consider their position in the international context. We consider that we cannot rely on something that we do not produce as fossil fuels. So I think that this shows to what extent, if we manage to remain united, well, a pity that a big country as the United States decides to leave, but the rest will keep on doing.
Quickly running out of time, but you mentioned the meeting with China in July. How harmonious are those discussions? Because we talk about multilateralism, and it used to be the bright spot in this climate space, and we wonder now whether it still is, and that there is a lot of falling out happening. How is the collaboration with China, with Brazil, with the others?
Of course, we are all different, and we are entering into a kind of multipolar world. And there are things where we agree and things where we do not agree. But climate action is a market driver. It's a financial driver. It is a technology driver. And we all agree that it is also a driver for peace or war, for suffer or prosperity. And there we can find ourselves in the same place.
And just very quickly, Europe's NDCs will be laid out by the time COP happens, yes?
I hope so. I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think that it will be solved in the coming weeks. So I think that we will be in a position to be taken into consideration.
Well, I look forward to speaking to you in Belém about that. Teresa, thank you very much. And I know you were part of the opening ceremony yesterday, and I'm just going to throw to a few other bits and pieces at the opening ceremony. Lots of voices, actors, politicians, Mr. Steele, of course, of the UNFCCC. This is what they had to say.
The public's already there, but it's a fear of this paradigm that we're living in, where we have a president who's denying climate change, and we have a fossil fuel industry that's just completely gone off the rails with lies and throwing money at this issue, and fear But if there's nothing else that this moment requires from any of us, is to drop our fear and to speak up and speak about what we know is true.
My most important message today is don't believe the doomsters and the gloomsters and the naysayers who say the world is somehow moving away from climate action and clean energy. It's not the case.
The complexities of getting them to agree based on a consensus-based process is difficult, but it is delivering. What COP30 presents us with an opportunity to do is, first of all, removing this preconception that every COP must deliver everything. I think those are expectations that we set that aren't the most helpful.
So a few of the voices that we heard yesterday at the opening ceremony. Now, to wrap up today's show, we hear from two people who bring deep insight into what's working and what's not, and what's next for business in the climate transition. Peter Backer is President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a global coalition of CEOs committed to building a net zero, nature positive economy. Good to see you again, Peter. And Mindy Luber is President of Sustainability, a non-profit series, spent decades mobilizing investors and corporate leaders to align capital with climate action. I guess, you know, I've reached that point where a show like this isn't really a show like this unless Mindy Luber is on it, actually. and the same goes for you as well, Peter. And look, I read your Forbes piece recently, and I've seen a piece you did, I think, for Reuters. You're both surprisingly optimistic. Is this, you know, try to keep a straight backbone despite all the headwinds being thrown at you?
There's no question. Let's start with it is a more difficult time than it was last year or the year before that. That said, what I am seeing every single day in the private sector is good news. No, they don't want to raise their hand and do big public campaigns. There's some pressure on private sector leaders. But in fact, behind closed doors within their corporations, they are staying the course. They are setting goals and meeting those goals. Many are supporting policy. We're seeing a rise in renewable energy, unlike anything else. And so the fundamentals are still there. When Morgan Stanley or PwC poll their members, 90% say they are staying in sustainability. They're going to continue putting resources into it. In fact, they think they'll put more in next year. So I don't want to be fooled that all the negative news is really what's happening. There is negative news, but there's much positive.
Okay, so the business case has never been stronger, I guess is the message from both of you. And we see that. There is a lot of evidence, and we hear that from all the corporates. Let's talk about the policy bit, though. And Peter, investment is flowing into countries and sectors offering, I guess, the right mix of enabling conditions. Yep. Is that list of countries getting shorter and shorter? And would you where would you put? We just heard from Teresa at the Commission at the Europe. Are you worried about what's happening in Europe?
Well, I think Europe needs to sort itself out. You know, Europe has two conversations going. One is the competitiveness conversation, and the other is around the Green Deal and what to do with that. I think what is missing in that conversation is what is the link between those two. Because if you go to India, if you go to Southeast Asia, China, the whole conversation is if we want to make our economy competitive, we need to drive sustainability. We need to drive to net zero. So I always say, you know, the world is a whole lot bigger than the USA. Europe needs to sort itself out, but Asia is at this point in time the driver for change. Yeah.
Are you worried about Europe as well? I mean, yes, we mentioned China, yes, we mentioned India, yes, we mentioned Brazil, the BRICS in general, ahead of Belém in Brazil, of course. But are you worried about what's going on in Europe?
There's no question there's a little more tentativeness than we would like to see. On the other hand, the understanding within Europe of citizens, of voters, of policymakers, of the gravity of climate change and the need to address it. Nobody's debating that. And so I believe that it will land in the right place. And even in the United States, and yes, we all read the headlines, and it is true, there's so much being pulled back at the federal level. A week ago in California, we stood with the governor and with legislatures in passing the Cap and Invest law, extending laws. So there is still work to be done at the states, and we'll be there to do it.
I'm glad you mentioned California. We have Rob Bonta coming on tomorrow morning. And I think one of the questions we will be asking is, clearly there's a massive impetus there, but just how are you banging your head against a closed door, given the fact that when it comes to legislation, anything is going to really be overturned at the end of the day?
Well, we are learning that everything gets litigated in the United States now. Laws pass, lawsuits are filed. It seems to be the way of the world. But many of those lawsuits are prevailing. So the big issues at the federal level, they cannot be denied. And I do believe that companies and investors are concerned about losing tax credits, about losing the EPA's authority to regulate climate change. They have spent 20 years, if not more, retooling, getting ready to deal with the world of climate change and the regulations that deal with it. It is very destabilizing for anyone in the private sector to all of a sudden be told, no, climate change is not a problem. So I think we're seeing even more private sector leaders prevailing on states, and hopefully we'll have some action at the federal government, but that's a long stretch.
Drew Bond, Peter, from C3, came on at the start of this show and said, you know, this administration may be the best thing that's ever happened to climate. I mean, it seems a little bit of a stretch to me, given what we've heard. But what can industry leaders do to keep up the pressure on federal government?
Well, I think the first thing is to be in COP30 in Belém. Brazilian presidency is putting together a program which is basically not about negotiations anymore, but the COP of implementation. So what are the solutions? What are the barriers to scale those solutions? Is it policy, finance, is it demand? And then really drive that conversation into action. You know, you talk about policy, but what I see happen is it's now become an economic conversation. We yesterday launched the CEO Handbook for Physical Risk Assessment in supply chains. The economic cost of inaction are now becoming clearer and clearer, and that will force business to act. But if we can get an implementation conversation in Brazil, then it will be... And the thing that government needs to do is stimulate demand for the solutions. That's the one thing they need to do.
Yeah, and Mindy, I mean, you and I have talked, you know, often over the last few years, and I got to say, I sense an optimism from you that I haven't seen in a few years. I guess it's as a result of that sort of thing that Peter's saying. And are you going to Belém? Are you going to COP? If you can get there?
Yes, or likely I will send a team, and either I will go or someone will go.
And what do you want to see happen?
We want to see exactly what Peter said. We want companies and investors to be leaning in on the need to move forward. I mean, the reality is the clean energy economy is the future of our economy, period, end of story. That's where we're going to see jobs. That's where we're going to see profits. That's where we're going to see the ability to fuel the new AI and everything else coming on board. So if we're continuing to see, which I am, businesses and investors putting money into the clean energy economy, moving forward on their goals, standing up on policy, less than I would like, but certainly still doing that, I think we've got a shot because the numbers are so clear. The numbers of risk, hundreds of billions of dollars spent on the impacts from climate. We can't continue spending hundreds of billions of dollars a year. I think companies, insurers are starting to see that and act because of that.
I'm going to have to finish it there, Mindy and Peter, but you know, thank you very much for coming in. But just stay there for a second, because I do want to play one more soundbite from Christiana Figueres, and it talks to the logistics and the difficulty of the COP happening in Belém. But it was actually quite interesting what she had to say, because of course there has been so much debate, so much hand-wringing, so much criticism over the decision to host the meeting in Belém. Tough to reach, tough to find affordable accommodation, and as a result, tough for many to attend. This is what Christiana said about it.
It's a tough location. It is an important symbolic location to be in the Amazon. Let us remember the importance of the Amazon to our global environmental stability. So they have chosen to locate this for symbolic reasons, very important symbolic reasons, in Belém. That does mean that the logistics are difficult, challenging. They are working on those challenges, and they have definitely improved in many different respects with regard to accommodation and prices, and they are continuing to do so. But one has to ask, what is more important? Is it about ease of logistics, or is it about sending the right messages?
So I'm going to leave everyone with with that question. Mindy and Peter, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to pick all of this up again tomorrow morning. Our focus tomorrow will be on leadership at the subnational level. As I just said, Rob Bonta, California's Attorney General, will join us, as will several city mayors. We'll talk carbon credits and the importance of transparency and integrity in that market with Annette Nazareth. And we'll be joined by investors and tech companies striving to drive climate ambition. It'll be an exciting show. Do join us at 8:30 tomorrow. Good job, guys.